Um, Please make sure that your microphone is muted.
From all over the place.
Welcome, everyone. We'll just wait one or two more minutes. Great. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Catherine Gordon with the Office of Public Witness, and I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to Presbyterian Advocacy Hour. Today's gathering is titled Courage in the Face of Authoritarianism, Historical Roots and Modern Responses, and we hope it will be a timely and important conversation. Whether you are joining us for the first time or have been with us before, we are grateful for your presence. This hour is a collaborative effort among several Presbyterian Church programs, including the Office of Public Witness, the Office of Immigration Issues, Self-Development of People, the Presbyterian Hunger Program, and many others. Together, we hope these monthly gatherings equip you with the knowledge, tools, and community you need to take focused and faithful action on some of the most pressing issues of our time, while also offering a space for spiritual grounding and connection. We gather every fourth Wednesday of the month, and our next advocacy hour will be March 25th, and will focus on Christian nationalism. A few quick logistics. We're in meeting format today, and we invite you to keep your camera on if you're able, but please keep your microphone muted. We invite you to use the chat to introduce yourself and connect with others, and the Q&A feature for questions. Our team will be monitoring both. We have an outstanding panel today, followed by action training with Reverend Jimmy Hawkins, Director of the Advocacy Offices of the PCUSA. Reverend Alonzo Johnson, Director of Self-Development of People, will moderate our first panel. And I now invite him to open us up with a moment of spiritual grounding.
Thank you, Catherine. As we ground ourselves, we also acknowledge the evil that's happening in the world today. We also acknowledge kind of totalitarianism, fascism, things that are creating fear among us. And so I want to center us, as we talk about fear and courage, I want to center us with a quote that comes from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Russian writer who wrote about the gulags in the Gulag archipelago. There is a quote from him that is timeless, and he wrote this quote decades ago, and it goes like this: "In keeping silent about evil, in burying it so deep within us that no sign of it appears on the surface, we are implanting it, and it will rise up 1,000-fold in the future. When we neither punish nor reproach evildoers, we are not simply protecting their trivial old age. We are thereby ripping the foundations of justice from beneath new generations." And having used this quote, I want you to use the chat right now. The chat will be our courage wall. It's our wall of courage. Because right now we realize we need courage in the face of evil. And we need courage in the face of oppression. And we need courage in this time where political repression, fear, political violence is happening all around us. And so we need our chat to be our courage wall. because there are so many things that are causing fear and terror in our country and in the world today. And so here's what I would like you to do with our courage wall. I would like you to, in one word, just put in the courage wall, what gives you courage in this time? Because I want you to name what it is that gives you courage. And you can even connect that with what gives you hope in a time such as this. And so place that in the chat. Because one of the best things to do is to name this, right? Name those things that give us courage, to be vocal about our pain and our concern. There's a great quote from Zora Neale Hurston that says, if you are silent about your pain, they will kill you and tell you you liked it. They would say you liked it. So put that courage on that wall so that we can see what gives you courage these days. What is giving you hope these days? What is helping you navigate these days? Wonderful. And as you continue to do that, we'll pray. This prayer comes from the incredible Cole Arthur Riley, her book, Black Liturgies. And it's an excerpt of one of her prayers. Let us seek God in prayer. And this is called Before Protest, is the name of the prayer. Defiant God, if you were the voice of the prophets, then you remain a God who speaks against exploitation and oppression. Silence the lies in our minds that tell us our fight is futile. Let us hope in our cause swell as we come together with shared voice. Let hope in our cause swell, awaken our full emotional range, that our work will be fueled by a mysterious entanglement of righteous anger and defiant hope. May we heed the voice of our own interior prophets and protect our bodies as we resist empire, especially the youngest and the most vulnerable among us. Amen and amen. And at this time, I'd like to introduce our amazing panel. As we talk about fear and authoritarianism, it is only right and fitting that we have folks that can help us navigate this policy-wise, navigate this theologically, and navigate this through action. And so our speakers, our first speaker on the panel is the incredible Brett Heinz. He serves as the American Friends Service Committee's Global Policy Coordinator for Economic and Climate Justice. In his role with the Global Policy and Strategy Department, he works to promote policy solutions that provide for economic justice, climate sustainability, and lasting peace around the world. And our second panelist is Dr. William Yu. Dr. Yu is the Associate Professor of American Religious and Cultural History at Columbia Theological Seminary. He is a teacher, scholar, and public theologian who interprets the most challenging and urgent issues of racial justice with clarity, depth, honesty, and precision. And our third panelist is Reverend Anna Kendig Flores. And Reverend Flores is the Anti-Racism Institutional Assessment Coordinator, interim co-executive presbyter of the Twin Cities area. Her work within the church context is focused on Christian formation through the lenses of anti-racism and liberation, seeking to the transformation of systems of harm, oppression, and exclusion. And we will start with Brett. Brett, policy-wise, what are we looking at here, right? Policy and historical analysis, United States national security, the expanding of these frameworks. Educate us. What are we looking at here, policy-wise? Let us know what do we need to know about this time we're living in, policy and historically.
Yes, thank you for this lovely introduction and for having me on today. We're living in very busy times, I suppose. I thank you for putting up the slideshow. I'll probably be blowing through this pretty quickly here. since I tend to go over my time, I'll focus on this quickly. But I've been looking a lot recently into how the expansion of the national security state, both in the US and internationally, has a lot to do with previous policy in the war on drugs, in the war on terror. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the second Trump administration is pretty dramatically expanding the role that military and security agencies play in U.S. policy, both domestically and overseas. Domestically, as I'm sure everyone here knows, multiple U.S. cities were occupied by federal authorities last year, including both my hometown of Charlotte, North Carolina, and also my current town of Washington, D.C. A lot of this has been National Guard, but also an increasingly aggressive and paramilitaristic ICE and DHS. Trump has also heavily militarized the US-Mexican border in a way that we've never seen before, even creating national defense areas, essentially areas of land around the border in which the US military is authorized to detain and to hold suspects. Overall, there were about 35,000 troops deployed on US soil last year, which cost hundreds of millions of dollars, perhaps up to $1 billion. We don't have final estimates on this yet. And most disturbingly of all, the White House has even toyed around with the idea of invoking a law called the Insurrection Act in order to essentially declare martial law nationwide. Next slide, thank you. Great timing. But this is not only limited to a development that's happening here at home, it's also something that we could see in how we're interacting with the rest of the world. The White House claims, despite any congressional authority to do so, that we are currently in a state of active hostilities, which they take to mean that they have the right to operate as though we were at war. They dramatically expanded what the definition of a foreign terrorist organization was last year to include drug cartels, and we could see what the result of that has been since then. Over 40 different airstrikes on civilian boats in violation of international law, killing at least 150 people, as well as most recently the illegal overthrow of the Venezuelan government, which President Trump himself is willing to tell you was largely motivated by the desire for control over their oil. Now, a lot of this regime change in Venezuela and these other activities have been justified by this idea of narco-terrorism. And this is an important idea for understanding where we got to today. Both parts of that, both the narco and the terrorism. And we're starting to see now that they've already overthrown the Venezuelan government, that we now have the largest buildup of military assets in the Middle East since the Iraq War. And Iran appears to be the next target for U.S. militarism. And finally, congressional efforts to restrain the White House have been ongoing, but largely unsuccessful so far. And this is the context in which we find ourselves. The question is, how did we get here? I would argue that these domestic militarizations and these foreign military activities are two sides of the same coin. And I think that you could look at some of the things coming out of the White House and the administration to prove that. Trump, in late September of last year, noted that deploying the National Guard to U.S. cities was, quote, a war too. It's a war from within. We should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military. And then shortly thereafter, Attorney General Pam Bondi said, quote, just like we did with the cartels, i.e. bombing, we're going to take the same approach with Antifa, destroy the entire organization from top to bottom. And Antifa, of course, is kind of a catch-all term for what the White House considers to be its domestic political opponents. These are examples of a concept that is called sometimes the imperial boomerang, which is the idea that violence which is committed abroad by very interventionist, very imperial powers eventually finds its way back into the imperial society practicing it overseas, at which point it will be used against the domestic population. And there's one other commonality that I think we could see in all of these different little pieces, and that's the expansion of presidential power, which has been a problem for quite some time now, for longer than I've been around, for sure, but has expanded dramatically at a pace we've never seen before last year. All of this can be tied together with a quote that I also took from the president last year: I have the power to do anything I want to do. And I think he means it when he says it. And we should understand, why does the president have this power? Again, how did we get here? Next slide, please. So I start with the war on drugs in my analysis of this. Like many of our problems, this one starts with Richard Nixon, which dramatically expanded executive authority. This is the first time that the term the imperial presidency really started to be used commonly in order to launch the war on drugs. What are some of the things that we saw when the war on drugs was launched? Well, there was an expansion in the National Guard's role in U.S. policing. There was an expansion of U.S. security agencies, both in their authorities and their size. Aggressive intervention in Latin America, focused specifically on cracking down on D.C. to serve as a model for the rest of the country. And the war on drugs generally was justified by a lot of racist fear-mongering and also the desire to repress political opponents. I have a quote here, which I will, for the sake of time, not read it in its entirety, but it's a quote which I always try to point back to when talking about the war on drugs, where John Ehrlichman, who was Nixon's domestic affairs advisor, very explicitly says that the war on drugs was thought of as a way of associating the anti-war left with marijuana and black people with heroin. And once that was done, these two groups which opposed the Nixon presidency could be criminalized because of these associations. And this is directly from someone who is deciding policy within the Nixon White House. Next slide, please. So you could see as we move from Nixon into Reagan, and we were kind of moving closer to the 1990s here as well, the war on drugs grows increasingly militaristic. Reagan officially declares that drug trafficking is a national security threat, which only allows further military incursion into what is typically thought of as a domestic issue. And National Guard deployments. This is where we really started seeing National Guard deployments to U.S. cities becoming common, including their participation in 20,000 arrests in 1990. At the time, members of the U.S. government would willingly tell you, at least some would, that this was done as sort of a form of propaganda, as an ideological tool. I'm quoting Colonel Richard Browning III here, who quoted that the National Guard is America's legally feasible attitude change agent. When the government wants to change the attitudes of Americans, you could send the National Guard in, and suddenly the tone of the conversation changes. This is also an era in which we saw the creation of this idea of narco-terrorism, which has always been a controversial idea. It was actually created by a U.S. ambassador to Colombia who participated in narco-terrorism during the Iran-Contra scandal, meaning that he, if anyone, probably had a pretty good idea of what he was talking about. But this idea is really kind of a flimsy one that's drawn a lot of criticism over the years for oversimplifying a lot of the complexities with the drug trade and essentially for justifying military interventions abroad to solve problems with drug use here at home. And this has been brought into all of our recent activity in the Caribbean, where both the victims of our airstrikes and the Venezuelan president Maduro have been referred to explicitly as narco-terrorists. Next slide, please. The war on terror changed everything and also nothing at all. In some sense, it was a change in degree, but there was a new expansion of the military, new foreign interventions, and new restrictions on U.S. civil liberties. The war on drugs became a part of the war on terror, essentially, and affected the way that we dealt with cartels, both in Latin America, and then also the way that we dealt with foreign terrorist organizations like the Taliban. The creation of Homeland Security, the Department of Homeland Security, that phrase itself played a very important role in framing a lot of issues in the way that they're thought of now. Immigration, for the first time, was now thought of as a security threat rather than as a matter of human resources, as a matter of humane management of society. And basically, a lot of different things started happening, including an explosion of Afghan heroin being brought into the United States, which did not cause, but helped to fuel an opioid crisis that we're now trying to solve with even more war abroad. And that's a whole tangent on its own, which I won't get into. Finally, a connecting thing here is targeted killing, which is a concept that started in the war on drugs against supposed kingpins of cartels. The idea was that by assassinating top leaders, we could disrupt our enemies. And this has now survived into what we're seeing against airstrikes, mostly against civilians in the Caribbean. Next slide, please. I think that my thesis in going through all of this history really is that Trump right now thinks he could break the rules because past presidents under the wars on drugs and terror did break the rules and got away with it and were able to essentially do whatever they wanted and thereby set the precedent both legally and also just in the public's eye for what the president can get away with now. Every element of what we're seeing today can be seen in earlier stages of these wars. The fusing of cops and soldiers, conjuring hysteria to justify political repression, expansion of the security state, treating domestic drug abuse as an international military problem, foreign intervention, the use of the National Guard, and importantly, policymakers who either do not know or do not care about the ways that past policies brought us to where we are now and are thus trying to double down on a failed status quo. Next slide, please. I've rushed through a lot of information here, so I'll come out and say why I think this matters exactly, and what the implications should be for our messaging when we're trying to talk to the public about all of these rapidly changing phenomena. We should not just be quibbling with minor arguments or surface level arguments about what is legal or what is precedented or what is within the frame of U.S. civility. I think that we need to be explicitly rejecting the idea that security is a framing that helps us in solving a lot of the issues that we're facing. And this can have some fairly radical implications, but I think that we're living in fairly radical times. Some of these implications that I would point to are the ideas that we should just reject entirely that occupations of U.S. cities with the National Guard are related to crime at all and accept that they are a form of political repression. We should deny entirely, reject the supposed idea that U.S. airstrikes in the Caribbean are about drug trafficking. They have nothing to do with drug trafficking. It is part of an imperial foreign policy. The idea that drug abuse is being caused by people outside of our borders, pushing drugs within upon us, instead of realizing that drug abuse has been a problem in the United States for a very, very long time now, and we're not treating it as a public health issue, which is the true solution, but as something that we could externalize, put at our borders, or even outside of them. I think we need to start talking a lot more about the imperial presidency, about the risks that are posed by having one man unchecked by the rest of the government being able to do so much of this. And I think we should also start looking at the tools, toys may be the right word, that allow him to engage in this level of executive authority. Right now, that's DHS, which is an organization that in its current form should not exist at all. The useful pieces of it should be spun off to other agencies, but as an institution, it cannot be reformed or improved. It must be dismantled. And we have to think about different ways of dealing with the issues touched on by DHS. Finally, I guess I should be talking about my real key point here, which is that if we talk about all of our problems as though they're military problems that can be solved with cops and soldiers, with guns and bombs, we're never going to solve any of these problems. We're going to continue failing and increasingly militarizing our society in order to try to suppress the symptoms and not the disease. And this, I think, is something that we can see all the way back in the Nixon era and has very a strong through line into the situation we find ourselves in today. These are a lot of the conclusions that I've come in just trying to find out where we are today.
Thank you. This is powerful. Kind of the necessary illusions that are being created. Absolutely. Thank you for lifting this up and a great, amazing analysis. Thank you for this. And I'm hoping as we hear, Brett, that we gain more of an understanding about the dynamics of what's going on and what's happening in play and what is terror and what's considered terror. So thank you, Brett, for educating us and preparing us. We need this.
Thank you for having me on.
Wonderful. Next up is the incredible Dr. William Yu. I just want to say before Dr. Yu speaks, I'm going to put in the chat his new book, which is incredible, Reckoning with History, Settler Colonialism, Slavery, and the Making of American Christianity. It's an incredible book, and Dr. Yu is an incredible scholar. And, as Presbyterians, we've been thinking about what does it mean to go to our confessions at a time like this, especially Barmen. I'm thinking a lot about Barmen. And Dr. Yu and I have had some conversations about Barmen, the Barmen Confession. So, Dr. Yu, ground us theologically. How does where does Barmen fit in with this conversation? Educate us.
Oh, hey, thanks, Alonzo, and thanks, Brett. And feel free to call me William. Feels like we're kind of all on the same team, trying to do the good and hard work of resistance and justice together. So let me start, Alonzo, before getting into a little bit of Barmen. Here's something from the book that you noted that I found really quite impactful and meaningful. This is the Black Presbyterian minister, James W.C. Pennington, a formerly enslaved man from the eastern shore of Maryland who escaped slavery and made his way up north. I believe he is recognized, though he did not get a transcript and degree at the time, as the first Black student at Yale Divinity School. He was both a congregational and then Presbyterian minister. And so he went to Europe a few times in his transatlantic abolitionist work. And he went to Germany at one time, Scotland at one time. And this quote from him is from the Paris Peace Conference, where he spoke in 1849. And in thinking about fear and authoritarianism and what it means to be a faithful Christian in the United States, I found this very helpful. Oh, there's nothing on the slide. If you look on the chat, I think I have copy and pasted my insight from Reverend Pennington. So he notes that the gospel of Jesus Christ simultaneously encourages and curbs the excesses of nationalism. He writes, in thinking about his own second-class status in the United States, it is a blessing to have a country. It is a blessing for us to be in the United States, and it is a virtue, and it is a call for us to love it. At the same time, this love of country is capable of great abuse. Christians were called to honor God through service to our fellow citizens. At the same time, this same gospel faith anchors us in the immutable justice of God and constantly reminds us that persons of every nationality, as Brett has helped us to do as well, that persons of every nationality share one common humanity. We're all made in the divine, beloved, sacred, beautiful image of God. So I do believe that is what we are wrestling with today. How can the gospel both inspire us in our commitment to this country, while at the same time helping us to challenge when we see excesses and abuses? And so with that, I'm going to turn quickly to two Bible verses that are really anchors of the Theological Declaration of Barmen, which Karl Barth is known as one of the authors, if not the principal authors, of this document that became adopted as a confession in our church, capital C, PCUSA. And it is, in many ways, for Barth and for other faithful German Protestant Christians and Catholic Christians as well, it is their desire to resist what Karl Barth called in the German, or I'll just say it in the English translation, cultural Protestantism, and the worries of cultural Protestantism. In some ways, I think for us, and I know this is for an advocacy hour in a future month, it is thinking about Christian nationalism. I do think that an authoritarianism that connects well, I think, with Barth and other German believers, their concerns about cultural Protestantism. A church or a gospel or a Christianity that became too entangled with the sinful desires and demands of that culture. Interestingly, so two of the verses, you might see it there in the chat, John 14:6. I was surprised, quite frankly, to be reminded to see this as, I think, the first anchor of the six of the Barmen Declaration. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And the reminder here from Barmen is that Jesus Christ is the one word of God, and that Jesus Christ, and it is an appeal to the lordship of Christ, I think, in a way that contrasts with the ways in which the lordship of Christ was being used, quite frankly, by Nazism. This is to say, the lordship of Christ is not about domination. It is not about coercion. It is not about abuse. It is not about addressing hyperinflation and economic anxiety then in 1930s Germany. It is not about addressing these real challenges. Hyperinflation was a real challenge. Economic anxiety and the loss of job, they were real challenges. But the way to address them in the lordship of Christ is not through persecution, is not through militaristic violence, is not through trampling upon other people's, particularly vulnerable minorities, their individual rights and dignity. That the lordship of Christ, if Jesus really is the way, the truth, and the life, it is to honor and enact and embody this lordship in ways that are about, I think, what we would say, compassion, mercy, and integrating that with order and justice. to provide equality of opportunity for all people. So that is, in a way, these competing. And I think I will say, as an historian, there have always been competing interpretations of the Lordship of Christ. And sadly, sometimes we know in the history of this country, the interpretations that are corrupt, that are evil, and that are damaging, sometimes, though they don't win out in the long term, they do win out in moments. And so for us, it is the reminder that we too are called to appeal to the Lordship of Christ. If Christ truly is our Lord, going back to another confession in our book of confessions, the Westminster Confession of Faith, if Jesus truly is our prophet, priest, and king, what does it mean for us to be prophetic? What does it mean for us to be priestly? And not necessarily what does it mean for us to be kings, but I do think, what does it mean for us to be responsible disciples in church and civic spheres? So that is something that we are wrestling with. And I think I'll say this and then one more verse. The third scriptural anchor to Barman is that verse Ephesians 4:15, but speaking the truth in love, we must grow up in every way into him who is the head, again, lordship, into Christ. And I think we're seeing it even with all of you here together for this Presbyterian Advocacy Hour, with lots of gratitude for Alonzo and Catherine for setting this up for us, that we are seeking to speak the truth in love. Now, sometimes speaking the truth in love can be comforting and can be in ways that don't hurt other people's feelings. But I think sometimes that gets mistaken, that speaking the truth in love also is about clarity and also can be confrontational. Now, we don't want it to be confrontational in ways that are dehumanizing and in ways that bring up too much conflict so that it is not heard. But I think it is permissible and it is faithful for us to speak the truth in love to meet the demands of our current times, to speak the truth in love for such a time as this, to speak the truth in love in ways that want to protect the vulnerable and the marginalized in our midst. We know, and now this is not in the chat, and I'm going to get to John 10 in a minute, but we know in the Old Testament, there are many verses that say the full measure of God's love and justice is manifest when the people of God care for three kinds of people: the widow, the orphaner, and the widow, the orphan, and the foreigner. We know that this is what God is calling us to do, and we know this is where God's love and justice is manifest, when we care for the widow, when we care for the orphan, and we care for the foreigner. And then finally, I'll say this is not from Barman, but this is me thinking about it and thinking about, Alonzo, I'm so grateful for you for bringing us together, fear and authoritarianism. This is the words of Jesus as attested to in the Gospel of John 10:10. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it abundantly. I think this is what we're trying to be all about. We are trying to recognize, even when it is in the garb of Christianity or a certain kind of Christianity that we oppose, we acknowledge authoritarianism. We acknowledge appeals to Christianity to oppress and dominate people. That is to steal and to kill and destroy. And we have to name a thing for what it is. And instead, and not only naming that and resisting that, but we do need to think deeply and discern together how we might profess a gospel and embody and enact it that is about life and that is about abundant life. I think one of the reasons why, and I don't want to make the parallel too straight line and too tight, but thinking about the economic anxiety of our day in 2026 and thinking about the ways in which many Americans feel as though the American dream is declining, if not dying. And when we think, what is the American dream? I think it is maybe three things. One, I think the American dream is about perhaps upward social mobility. I think that is the most commonly understood part of the American dream. That with hard work, gumption, a little bit of luck, support from community, that one's children can do a little bit better than the parents. That is, I think, how many parents understand the American dream. I will say, though, another definition of the American dream is less about upward social mobility, but it is about freedom and liberty. It is about the freedom to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is about the freedom to make choices that lead to flourishing and promote the common good. With the, quite frankly, the understanding that we live in a capitalist society and a capitalist nation, that some vocations and some jobs do pay more than other jobs. But it is to say that I have the freedom, if I am going to choose a little bit or even a medium bit lower paying job, that it is a job that will provide me access to basic goods, that it will not cut off my civic and political participation. And finally, that it will be about dignity, that all these jobs have dignity. So I think about Abraham Lincoln and the ways in which he really helped this country. Maybe redefine is too strong a way to say it, but it's quite moving the ways. I think we all know the Gettysburg Address. I think it's November 1863, 7 years ago. But Abraham Lincoln, President Lincoln, is appealing to 1776 and the forefathers in his words. But he says through the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence that this nation was conceived in liberty. I think I have a direct quotation of the Gettysburg Address, conceived in liberty. And what's fascinating about that is that this country was not conceived in liberty only. It was conceived in liberty and slavery. And that the founding framers, or the founders, if you will, they did promote liberty, but they did also preserve slavery after the American Revolution. But Lincoln is saying, look, we're moving forward, and I don't want to get too into semper reformanda, this idea of always being reformed, and I don't want to apply too much of Reformed theology or Christianity in Lincoln's writing. But it is this idea that we are a nation that is constantly seeking how we might pursue this more perfect union, and that we might be conceived in liberty, and that we might promote liberty and equality for all people, noting that it's bumpy and it doesn't all happen right away. But I just want to note, I think that's what the American dream is about, that we are conceived in liberty and that there is equality of opportunity for all people. And I think what we're seeing now is that, and maybe in a lot of ways it has been, but it is more and more Americans are feeling that equality of opportunity is being closed off to them. And so in one ways, we want to say authoritarianism and white Christian nationalism, that's not going to open up the doors of opportunity. And so we can decry that and we can criticize that. But in addition to that, I do think we need to think about, again, in three ways, how we can be good worshiping communities of faith that promote flourishing and that are actively involved in professing a gospel message that promotes dignity and opportunity. So that's what we do as a worshiping community of faith. And secondly, both for churches and for us individually, we are thinking about how we be good neighbors, that how we support those who are in the midst of us. And I think this also requires, and I know Alonzo is very passionate about this, it also requires asking who aren't our neighbors and why, and what are the systemic structural barriers that keep some people out of middle-class neighborhoods, and thinking deeply about the history of that and the ongoing consequences of redlining and segregation. And then finally, we do need to think about how we can be good citizens. I do think at one level, we want to criticize and call out the abuses and excesses of immigration enforcement. At the same time, we need to think deeply about reforming the laws so that there can be comprehensive immigration reform, so that this kind of enforcement is no longer necessary. And the last thing, and I know we're getting to policy, and Alonzo, I promise I'm going to end with this note. It is to note that the work of prophetic ministry, being a good worshiping community of faith, being a good neighbor, that can be direct, and that can be applying biblical principles and speaking the truth in love. The work of politics And the work of changing laws is messy and complicated and has always been imperfect and with compromises. And it is for us not to abandon our principles, not to abandon speaking the truth in love, but it is recognizing that when we get into policy, and I think Brett really helped us with this, it is understanding that the goal is getting to consensus, 50+1. So one thing I've been thinking about, and I think it's Representative Mike Lawler from a Republican congressperson from New York State, I think, has suggested we gotta undocumented or unauthorized migrants cannot live in the shadows. It is not safe for them. It is not good for their dignity. It is not safe for the public order and this country. So we need to think deeply about getting everyone out of the shadows. But those who came undocumented, don't know when, whether it be 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, or 5 years ago. It is this idea of not, one compromise is not putting them on the pathway to citizenship, but putting them on a pathway to, if you will, permanent residency in this country. Now, I think some of us on this Zoom and this Presbyterian Advocacy Hour, we're not thrilled with that because it is quite literally creating a second-class tier of American existence. But it is to recognize that that is something that perhaps will be on the table in thinking about comprehensive immigration reform. And for me, I'll just share personally, it is not settling and automatically or instinctively going to that as the solution. I prefer a solution that provides pathways over time with fairness and paying back taxes and all the like to eventual citizenship. But I understand why and how this pathway to residency may be more politically possible. And that I don't exactly know. You can tell I'm still sorting it out, but it is something for me to be mindful of. The big thing for me and for all of us, it is to recognize people in this country cannot live in the shadows. That is unacceptable according to the gospel. And that is also unacceptable in terms of civic responsibility and public safety for all. So sorry to end with some messy policy, but yeah, that's what I've got, Alonzo. I hope that was okay.
It's always okay, Dr. Yu. Thank you for grounding us. I mean, I'm like hooting in my heart. It's a sermon, brother. And I just thank you for the sermon, but also thank you for grounding us and being realistic about our faith. And I think, especially as you're speaking, Dr. Yu, I'm looking in the chat and there's some folks that are lifting up, what is barmen, right? I mean, this is a really integral part of our faith, right? I had a sermon series called There's a Confession for That, right? Which talks about, how do we address these issues? So Dr. Yu, this is grounding for us. And we need this. We need to know that in our tradition as Reformed faith people, that this exists and that this should be the way that we should be grounded in spiritual activism, but also looking at the theological aspects of who we are and who we're called to be. Thank you, Dr. Yu. You've my heart burned. My heart burned because I think that this is important for us, especially before we walk away from this particular event, to be thinking about our faith in this way.
Thanks, Alonzo. That's a good call out to Luke 24. More than our hearts burning within us. Thanks, Alonzo.
That's right. That's right. Amen. Amen. At this time, I'd like to, Anna Kendig Flores is with us. And Anna, first of all, we're lifting you up in prayer as she has been kind of on ground zero as we watch what's happening in Minneapolis with disbelief and horror. We know that Anna, you've been there. You've seen some things. You've been with the community, and sometimes we have ideas of what we should be doing. But Anna, school us. Talk to us about resistance strategies. Talk to us about the kinds of things that we need to do as activists or people that are thinking about being present, especially as we're hearing about ICE entering many of our cities. I mean, you've seen it. You've been with the community. Educate us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And it's Anna, and I know we didn't get to talk about it ahead of time, but it's Anna. And yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that setup in terms of it's been a really wild time here in Minneapolis. And a lot of our folks, both within our congregations and beyond, have really been moving through some really challenging times, been witness to some really painful things, whether it was, frankly, the the execution of some of our citizens or the capture and stealing of them off the streets. And so all of these things do moral and spiritual harm to all of us, whether we are direct witnesses or not, but many have been direct witnesses. And so just acknowledging that, really appreciating all the grounding that we've had in policy, in making this the way that we can understand the interconnection of all the issues that we are facing today, the way that what happens out there somewhere across the globe is actually happening really close to us and even next door to us and even within our own hearts sometimes, if we are buying into these strategies and philosophies and ways of being. And then also offering some alternatives and some ways of thinking and being that are rooted in scripture, and really deepening our understanding that this lies at the root of the American story, both the harm and the logics of harm, but also the capacity for transformation. And so thanks for all of some of those pieces. And I first want to just invite us, before we kind of go to this piece about how we ground ourselves in action, to just take a breath. And to, if you can, just close your eyes for a moment and just let some of that settle. Not with dread or kind of getting rigid around anything you heard, but just let it settle in your body. Maybe something you resonated with, or something that made your heart burn within you, as we said. And then coming back together. And the reason I asked us to do that, and you can certainly do it for longer after the end of this call, but the reason I asked us to do that is because the first thing I want to say is that political knowledge, historical knowledge, theological knowledge, and discussion is not the same thing as action. It is needed, it is necessary, it is important, and if we don't do it, we will wander into this work in ways that can be very harmful and can be ignorant in ways that can perpetuate exactly what we're trying to abolish. But on the other hand, recognizing that we sometimes, and this is coming from a book called, I believe, Politics is for Power by Eitan Hirsch. And he talks about how a lot of times the closer we are to sort of middle class comfort, and if that's you, that this may or may not fit from folks you've seen or from yourself and your own experience, it's easy to talk and know about things, to have opinions, to have discussions, and then not to actually enact those things in the world. And what I heard from William and others is, how do we actually change things? How do we actually shift? How do we actually advocate? How do we actually move together? And so that's sort of where my work has led. My anti-racism coordination work began in 2020. It was by accident. We had been doing this work since many years prior around anti-racism in this presbytery. But in 2020, we began something called the Anti-Racism Spiritual Pilgrimage. And as a result of the uprising after the murder of George Floyd, we said we need to understand and come together in clarity around why this happened here. Like that this wasn't new, this wasn't something that just sort of emerged from nowhere, as many particularly white folks were saying. This is rooted in the story of Minnesota and the Midwest more broadly. And we needed to understand that story. So we took 9 months and we did a Zoom pilgrimage through the history, picking up on different pieces, including the history of Indigenous Americans, Black Americans in the Midwest, Latine people, Hmong people, all those sorts of things, many of the same communities who are being targeted today. And so I just want to name that formation work is another part of the learning that we need to do together. And so when we talk about Christian formation, sometimes we just think like, oh, let's learn about the Bible, or let's talk about, how this whether it's a confession or scripture or story has meaning in my life. Yes, but also, what did Jesus do with the stories that formed his life? He used them to move. He used them to invite and to help people grow in their understanding of how they could move in the world and what they could dream of. I would highly recommend the book, The Politics of Jesus by Aubrey M. Hendricks, as a way to kind of enter into that idea of how did Jesus use scripture? How did, William, I just really appreciated the way that you kind of brought these scriptures into dialogue with many of our modern conversations. And I think that those are the kinds of things that we need to keep being able to do together, not again, just for conversation, but for the so what, now what. So understanding the depths of where we have come from and where we want to go together, dreaming different dreams together, is so important. And I just want to offer up two quick pieces that have been really helpful for the space that we've been in. In 2020, I also, alongside the history that we were sharing and kind of trying to help people think about themes and sort of dynamics and patterns that were showing up over time in the history, we also brought forth something that I've been calling the anti-racism spiritual capacities. And basically, it's based on the history of activism and action among people of color, particularly the civil rights movement, but also movements for change that have happened like Stonewall and so on and so forth, that actually help us understand what are the behaviors, what are the ways of being that actually have helped people stay in action even over generations. I think it's very easy for us to dream that if we just do the right set of things, this could be over by, I don't know, November, December, something like that. Maybe it would be over in 3 or 4 years. Maybe it would be, we want to put a timeline on things. But in fact, in order to really shift things, we have to think generationally. And that is hard. It is sometimes could feel disheartening, but it's also very true to the history of this work. And in fact, when we refuse to think generationally, that's how we end up here, because we think it got solved in the civil rights movement, or we think it got solved when gay marriage was ratified. It wasn't. Clearly it wasn't, because all those things are being walked back. So I want to just offer two quick pieces based in that spiritual capacities work. First of all, that fascism and the roots of fascism that we've been talking about here, like militarization, like control, like ideas of dominance as being a way to navigate our common lives, are based in fear. They're based in the fear of change, and they're based in the fear and lack of trust in one another. And so one of the spiritual capacities that we can bring to this moment is, how do I manage my fear? And so I'll just tell you a quick story that in the midst of everything that was happening in January, I was sitting at a family dinner, and my family is Mexican American. We, many of us are immigrants. I am a 1.5 or second generation person, but there were people who were immigrants at the table. And someone who had married into the family, who is a white Midwesterner, was kind of getting ramped up about things. And at one point, simply like blurted out, like, well, you're just saying that I can't have any feelings about this because I'm white. And that wasn't what was being said. But what was happening for them was, I have so much overwhelming fear inside of me, and I don't know how to handle it, that I feel like any attempt to, in the room, to sort of say yes and, is trying to control or to tell me I can't have those feelings. So that was it's an example of what I'm talking about. It was a loud example. It was a very obvious example, but all of us might have examples of this in our own lives, where fear has been writing our actions for us. And sometimes that fear can turn into forms of dominance. Sometimes that fear can turn into forms of rash action and things like that. So I want to invite you to think about, how do I live with and manage fear in my life? It could be physical fear, it could be spiritual fear, it could be existential fear, like what is this American project that we are doing together? And where is it headed? So thinking about that, because the opposite of being controlled by fear is genuine courage. Not courage like just bravery and doing something big because my ego is telling me to, or because I feel like that's the only way to prove that I'm a good person, but genuine courage that's based in the heart and that is driven by our deepest values. This sign here, well, oh, wherever, if I can point the right direction, this sign over here is from the march at the end of January that happened, that was so historic in the cities here. And it's from an organization called March. And you can see that it ties scripture directly to the request and the ask, the demand, in fact, to abolish ICE. So just being able to hold those deepest values as courage steps forward is really important. So the second thing I would just offer is being able to separate the ego, or our personal egos, from the work that needs to be done. There's a lot of kind of uh, denigrating of identity politics these days, certainly by the right, but also by many on the left and in the center who say we don't want to be talking about that before. We just need to come together. That will never hold. It will never hold because it erases the history of difference that has been baked in for centuries, and in fact, sometimes for millennia, into some human cultures, including in the United States. Patriarchy is real. Anti-gay and anti-trans bias is a real part of our history. Anti-Blackness is a real part of our history, right? The fear and exiling of people who are non-citizens is real. And if we don't actually talk about those things, don't actually talk about how they shape people's identities, experiences, understandings of the world, and political knowledge and wisdom, we will not be able to have any kind of coalition that will hold. So being able to separate the ego can be so important, because what it helps me do is understand, am I doing this because I want to prove that I'm a good person, because I want to pretend that my identities are not what they actually are, because I want to kind of let go of some of the dynamics that are actually a part of my life and just live into a vision of what it looks like to fight for justice? Or am I really grounded in who I am, what I can do, and what I can bring to this moment that's a little bit more humble and grounded? There are times when we need to speak up and stand up directly, and we've seen that here in Minneapolis. And there are times when that may not be the right thing. There are whole other lanes of people here who did not go to some of these events, who are not doing constitutional observation work, because if they do, they're being monitored by ICE, and then they're unable to do other types of work that are safekeeping work in our communities, feeding people, giving people rides, making sure people can make appointments that they need to make, all those sorts of things. So this piece around ego is really big, and I know there's really no way to cover it all here, but I did want to bring it forth as a way to just invite you into some of these practices and ways of being that can really help us work toward the intersectional abolition and wholeness that is being spoken to on this call in a way that isn't just living from here up, from our neck up, but really uses our whole bodies and our whole interconnected communities in ways that can be really powerful. I think of Adrienne Marie Brown and her work about talking about moving in murmurations, right? The flights of birds that can move kind of in different shapes, almost as if they're able to know exactly where everyone needs to be at the same moment. That is some of what we've seen here in Minneapolis. And it only happens when we drop our egos. It only happens when we move from political thought toward the so what, now what of political action, and really kind of hold all the pieces that you've heard on this call today together. So thank you.
Oh my gosh. Anna, thank you. My gosh, this is getting rid of ego, right? This Platonic understanding, head, good, body, evil, right? Thank you for Anna, this is amazing. I mean, how do we ground ourselves? Yeah, for this work. This is not about saviorism. This is not about us. This is, this and just as you mentioned, the legacies. I know that there's some folks in the chat that have been trying to pick up on some of your quotes, Anna. So hopefully you could give them to us again, because they're powerful, especially the ones around fear. So thank you so much for this. This is, wow, this is amazing. And we're honored. We're honored of the spiritual work that it takes. And thank you for reminding us, who we're called to be and what this is really about. Absolutely. Absolutely. So we have a few minutes to take a few questions, and then we'll move on to our next piece of this, but we don't have too much time. And so I know how we Presbyterians can be. And so we want to keep our questions kind of short so we can move on to our next piece. Any questions, anything that folks would like to ask our panelists? Where will you get the slides? Wendy, I believe so. I hope I'm correct in that.
We had a question. We had a question in the chat. What kind of courage is allowed in our churches?
Right.
I feel like that's a great question for all the panelists, frankly. But I'll just say real quick, I think that's a great question. And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that our Christian witness has been compromised. And it has often been compromised in human history, but certainly in the United States. It is so easy and so tempting for us to align and grow comfortable with the power structures that exist because it makes our existence easier and less threateningly transformational. And so asking ourselves what's allowed is a great question, and doing an analysis of what's allowed in my space, what would make it unacceptable in my congregation, then and asking myself, how does that square with Scripture? Not just in the way that we kind of machinate Scripture to sort of ask us to behave, but actually, how does it square with how Jesus used Scripture?
Brett or William, any?
I'll leave the theological matters to the other speakers who are far more educated on those matters than I am.
We had another question. Do you see parallels here with Israel's claims that the repression of Palestinians is all about security? I think that was for Brett.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of parallels, and to a certain level, it's not even an analogy. A lot of U.S. police departments train with Israeli military forces, including most of the largest U.S. Cities have official programs set up for training exchange with the Israeli military. So a lot of the practices that the Israeli state are engaging with against Palestinians are being brought over quite explicitly to the United States as a form of domestic law enforcement. So it goes beyond simply a matter of parallels. There is a direct connection, I think, between United States authoritarianism and Israeli authoritarianism, particularly in the persecution of the Palestinian people.
And we have time for one last question. Seeing how Christians have responded so beautifully in the past few weeks, months, year to what is happening in our country, and also seeing that this Christian response is not checking the authoritarianism or actions of the current administration and their minions, when should we do something besides gathering and singing? Is there nothing more? Are we going to behave either as England did in 1939 or spend years in the underground and never getting free of this?
I'm sure there's other comments that could be added here, but I think I want to draw us back to the spiritual capacities. And if what we're expecting is that there's something the church can do that will be some sort of definitive action that will just fix this, I think we're mistaken about what the history of reform movements have actually been. They have been, as I said, generational. I don't mean that we will take generations to get out of this particular iteration, but I think there's a way in which people expect, and I've often seen this in white folks in particular, that protests should have some sort of immediate responsive action in the system. That's not what protests are for. And so protests are to show a mass movement that will continue to vote in many cases, that will continue to agitate, that will continue to draw attention to these issues. And our courts and other systems are working in many ways. They are not working in all ways. We are in a very perilous time in some ways, but also there are many resistance strategies that are working. There are new cases being filed every day, including by the church. The ELCA and the Minnesota UCC here filed another court brief asking for access to detainees at the Whipple building where they are being held here. So these actions do have real grounding. And so I would just invite not the either or thinking of, well, we have to do this or it doesn't matter and it doesn't mean anything. So I just want to invite some curiosity there with that framing of the issue. Yes, there's more that can be done, and thinking that those things are not relevant or aren't actually transforming things as we speak may not be the way to go.
Yeah, thanks. Real quick, I'll just say a real shout out to like the beautiful, messy, incremental work of congregational life, of being together in a church with people who love one another. Don't always like one another, but love one another and are committed to being together and will disagree with one another. I do think just one quick note in thinking about the Make America Great Again, the authoritarianism, and the appeal of that in Christian garb and Christian nationalism. There have been several studies showing that not all, but many of the people who are attracted to this don't are not church members, that they self-identify as Christian, but don't belong to a local church. They find online communities and they find rallies to go to and the like. And it is a very politically, I would say partisan, like party-shaped kind of faith expression. One example of this, and I don't want to get too political, but several have pointed out in reading Vice President J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy, he talks about his grandmother, Mima or Mama, or something like that, but how she was a Christian and everything, but throughout the book, she really rarely went to church. And in some ways, that reflects how, and several other, Ryan Burge is someone who studied this, is that like local congregational life is not like a phenomenon among working class people in this country. And I don't know, maybe it's never been, I don't know. But it is to note that these are people who find resonance and we might say susceptibility to these authoritarian, exclusionary, hateful, oppressive Christian movements. But I do think so. The hope is that as we gather in local churches, and I see a lot in the chat about sometimes like finding the right local congregation, that there's a lot of good that can happen, even in the messy disagreements, to getting to unity, to getting to consensus, to getting to the understanding about all the things that Anna and Brett have been talking about in spiritual formation, anti-racist work, and also thinking about public policy. So I just want to say, like, let's support our local churches. I don't know all 8,400 or so in the PCUSA. I do know the 166 presbyteries, but I think there's a lot of good happening. And I don't want us to forget that in the midst of all this. And I do want to thank all the church people who are here on this advocacy hour.
Yeah, I think most of the comments I have to make have been made at this point, but I would like to, I guess, echo or double down on something that Anna was saying. I feel like one of the greatest frustrations of our moment is that everyone, at least everyone on this call, realizes that we're in a very bad spot, and there doesn't seem to be any immediate action that can change it. And it leads to a lot of frustration, but I don't think it should lead us to conclude that our efforts aren't worthwhile. I think that the most worthwhile efforts are those whose results are not apparent until much later down the line. A study of political history will tell you this. I mean, just precisely in how many of the things that are happening now have their roots in small changes that were made 50 years ago. The day that you plant the seed is not the day that you eat the fruit. And I think that each and every one of us is going to have to continue to do our own part in whatever sphere of life we're most active in, and that our collective efforts over time are going to be what makes the difference.
Catherine, how are we on questions?
I think we need to move to our next segment. So
Yes.
this panel has been so amazing. Thank you all.
Thank you, Anna. William, Brett, thank you. And Brett, thank you for those last words. We needed that. We needed those. And this has been really incredibly powerful. And it's been an honor to be able to be learned today, to listen to you, to sit at your feet and to listen to ways that we can find courage in difficult times. And so, Catherine, I'm going to pass this on to you.
Yeah.
As you will lift up Jimmy.
Yeah, so please stay on. Reverend Jimmy Hawkins, who is the director of the advocacy offices of the PCUSA and also a big leader of the Moral Monday movement, and the author of Unbroken, Unbound, A Story of Black Protest in America, is going to lead us in some nonviolence training. So if you want some direct action and training, please stay on. And I will hand it over to Jimmy.
Thank you, Catherine. And I really want to thank our panelists, William, Anna, and Brett. Really lead up well to what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about what are some actual steps that you can do in this move towards protest and this move towards resistance. And I'm going to share my screen. Now, I'm going to try, we've got about 21 minutes left. So I'm going to try to talk about 12, 14 minutes and leave at least a little time for engagement. So I'm going to share this PowerPoint. Let's see. All right. So can everyone see the PowerPoint? Just Alonzo? Perfect. Yep. All right. So how do we resist authoritarianism? So one of the things I do want to share and leave with you is that the advocacy offices are preparing 2 manuals to be released probably within the next month. We have one that deals with how resistance dealing with issues of immigration. But this one here that I want to talk from is on nonviolent resistance. It's going to be a manual that we have finished. It's in the hands of communications now, and they're offering formatting. So hopefully by the time we meet next month, we can be able to mail out digital copies. So this is the outline of it. Going to talk about what are some key concepts of nonviolent resistance. What are some principles of nonviolence? What about the relationship between religious faith and nonviolent resistance? Some stages, some steps in nonviolent resistance, some actions down at the bottom, and then a word about visuals, and then digital nonviolent resistance. So when we talk about the principles of nonviolence, we're talking about basically that the key to change is a commitment to nonviolent resistance. And obviously a lot of this concept comes out of Gandhi and Dr. King's work and their persistence and consistent advocacy that our protests must be nonviolent, that we don't meet violence with violence. It only makes the world a much more violent place. But also to understand that nonviolent resistance involves sacrifice, because there is a risk element that you're going to be involved in. Nonviolence is actively engaged in justice initiatives without causing harm under any circumstances. The principle involves respect for all people, is sustained by a deep conviction that a just God ultimately aligns with justice. Second paragraph from the bottom, the ultimate goal of nonviolence is redemption and reconciliation through the creation of the beloved community, and a just and peaceful society cannot be achieved through unjust or violent methods. All right. So some of the key concepts, and I'm not going to go through this, just list a couple of these. Obviously, some of the steps that you go through are civil disobedience, and Catherine can make the PowerPoint available to anyone who wants to take their time and go through it later. Community education, diplomacy, direct action. Some of the steps involve de-escalation. Some of them involve escalation, intervention, legal action, non-cooperation, nonviolent intervention, nonviolent protests, and nonviolent resistance. So religion, we obviously know that all of the faith religions, from the monotheistic religions to the polytheistic religions, always have a component where they talk about resistance, but out of love, out of peaceful nonviolent resistance, but resistance nonetheless to injustice, how to be shaped inwardly by a spiritual relationship with the divine that motivates and that orders your steps outwardly. That what we do is a reflection of what we believe. So people of faith have a long history of nonviolent resistance. And looking within the confines of the United States, you cannot, I think with the exception of contemporary nonviolent movements in the history of this country, most of the protest justice movements have been motivated by faith. You look at the abolitionist movement in this country, we have a whole denomination, the Quakers, who were committed to it. We see the denominations oftentimes walked along the fence where they didn't want to take a commitment one way or another, but the individuals were definitely people of faith. The civil rights movement, there's never been a more faith-based protest movement in the history of this country. Churches were the headquarters. The participants were people of faith by and large, not all of them, but by and large, and the leadership were clergy and people of faith. So religion and nonviolent resistance have always gone together. Now, right now in the contemporary society, there's a pushback on this where people of faith are saying that this is not a factor in our justice, in our advocacy, or in our faith walk, but they are actually in error. They are misrepresenting the history of Christendom in this country. Now, again, today, I don't think it's as concentrated or committed, because we see that there are movements that are occurring, not led necessarily by people of faith, I think the youth movement, the March of Life, led by young adults, I think many of them are young people of faith, but the requirement is that you are a young adult. And so we do see, I think, in the history of Christendom, and we have to really look at this right now, where advocacy, the prophetic voice of the church, and I think especially in particular the prophetic voice of the Black church, that assimilation has had some cost. That we're not necessarily the leading advocates for nonviolent resistance, but it's kind of become more spread. But I do think that we have spread the message to the white church, Protestant denominations, Catholic denominations, other denominations, to say that white supremacy is wrong and you have been complicit in it. So I do think that we're starting to see more denominations adopted, but I do think there's a diluting of our resistance. So the stages of nonviolent resistance, and again, once the manual is out within a month, you can see a lot more detail on how to do this. But these are some of the steps that you can take in developing resistance to an issue in your community, nationally or globally. You've got to establish your priority issues. None of us can do everything. Oftentimes we will have 5 or 6 issues that we're trying to work on. We really have to settle down and focus on the issues that really keep us up at night. What really bothers you to a degree that you can't sleep? Issues with children, human trafficking, racism, immigration issues. So establish, what are you trying to achieve? What issues are you trying to address? Also, then we have to look at community organizing with impacted communities first. Oftentimes in the church and in nonprofits and in middle-class communities, we sit with individuals who are more like us. Presbyterians sit with Presbyterians, Baptists sit with Baptists. Not necessarily always going to impacted communities. People know what their issues are and they know how to address those issues. So we've got to understand that we're in a partnership, even to the point where they are leading us in addressing these issues. Number 3, go beyond the impacted communities and build coalitions. Oftentimes, again, you will have in a community, let's say a 10-block radius, you might have 10 churches, but oftentimes we go along denominational lines. Presbyterians talk to Presbyterians, Baptists talk to Baptists. Look at those churches, those organizations within your community, and partner with them, because oftentimes separately you're talking about the same issues. We also have to have a first contact. Once we get our group founded and we have an idea, an identity, we have to make our first contact with those who are providing injustice in the community, whether it's from the government, whether it's from city council, whether it's from business, which is dealing with employees in an unjust manner. So we've got to have some type of first contact with them to have a conversation, say that this is what we see that is of concern with us. These are some solutions we want to recommend, and begin the stage of negotiations. Oftentimes, negotiations won't go far. So then you've got to escalate it. And you got to take it to other levels. You got to go outside of direct negotiations and start having protests in the community. One of the things that for example, I do think in our fight against gun violence in this country, oftentimes too readily, the NRA is identified, and even legislators. But we've got to take the struggle to these gun companies. They basically are getting off the hook. I noticed that in some of the communities where there are munition companies producing arms, selling them around the world, young adults have started having protests outside of the buildings. And yet, by and large, they get by without having direct impact through resistance. And then we've got to have direct action, wherein we start saying, well, the steps that we have taken thus far have not gained us the remedies that we want, so we're going to take it to another level. Then as we look at some actions that we can take, I went too far. All right. Rallies, and I'm looking at this thing. Okay, so tools. Actions are tools to implement change in this orange box. And then we're looking at the intent is to persuade, refuse to cooperate with oppression. And we want to produce a series of interventions to bring about change. And our goals are raising awareness because, as those who said in the chat, they had not heard of the Varman Declaration. Some people are not always aware of the justice issues that are going on right outside of their doors, or the ways that they are complicit in them. And then we got to have a paradigm wherein we want to enhance the lives of others. Some of the actions are marches and rallies, parades, pilgrimages, sit-ins, die-ins, occupations, also symbolic acts, especially folks who are more artistically inclined will have skits, plays, singing, mock elections, lobbying, and then economic actions as well, boycotts and strikes. All right, let's see what else we got. So a vigil is obviously a gathering, often public, where we come to express our desire for justice, things that we do in a vigil. A vigil can have words, a vigil can be silent, such as lighting candles, holding signs, oftentimes at night. So the flame of the candles is a very impressive image, and sharing personal stories, especially those who are most impacted. So it's a form of peaceful demonstration to remember and honor victims, demand accountability, and raise awareness. And I'm gonna keep going.
Jimmy, really quickly, could you, you have the reminder screen on your screen that's blocking some of the content. You see it, 3 reminders. Could you remove that on the corner? Yes.
Yes. All right. Okay, it doesn't want to go away. All right. Thank you, Alonzo.
Yes, sir.
All right. All right. And let's see what we got here. All right. So we want to do a case study real quickly on immigration, because we know that right now immigration is one of the hot issues of the. And did my screen switch? Are you now seeing the presenter screen?
Yeah,
yes, we're seeing the presenter screen. So yep, we see what you're going to do next.
All right. How's that? Good.
That's that. You got it.
All right. So also I have I'm going to show you this video very quickly. It's about 2 minutes and a half. We're going to do a case study on immigration, and these are some questions I want you to think about. Is there an understanding of how the immigration enforcement system works in your area? Are there immigration courts located in your region? How do those operate? Are there ways to support immigrants with active cases? Are there local law enforcement or jail agreements with ICE? And again, I know I'm going through this very quickly, and we'll share this, or DHS. What do they look like and how do they operate? Number 3, what state organizations are focused on immigrant rights in your region? And how does the issue of immigration intersect with other issues like labor? What is happening and where is it happening? So this is the video I want to share with you. All right.
Today we're here in Heinz Immigration Court, reporting on an ongoing story in our own Maryland backyard. The courthouse is located in Hyattsville, Maryland, right around the corner from Prince George's Mall. Courtrooms are on 2 floors of the office-style mid-rise, and inside, filming, photography, and recording of any kind is strictly prohibited. But I'll show you everything I can about daily proceedings inside this courthouse. Before entering the courthouse, every visitor is required to go through a security checkpoint. Once inside, take the elevator up to the 6th or 7th floors.
We can't see the video.
Yeah, I messed up.
From 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. every weekday. Each courtroom is equipped with a judge's bench with a judge and legal assistant preside. The seat where witnesses would often sit in a typical courtroom is occupied by a translator who communicates with non-English speaking respondents through a microphone and headset. Immigrant respondents sit at counsel tables opposite Department of Homeland Security lawyers. In the rear of the courtroom, a public gallery provides seating for family members and other spectators. The most common and publicly accessible hearings are called master calendar hearings. During these procedural hearings, immigrant defendants are informed of the charges against them and scheduled for future hearings. After introductory comments and questions, the judge asks defendants questions like, do you understand that you're in the United States without permission? And do you know the consequences of not returning to court? Some respondents already have lawyers, but for other cases, the judge grants defendants a couple of months to find an attorney and return to court for their next hearing. The courthouse is open to the public for master's calendar hearings, which are frequently attended by law students, members of the media, American Bar Association volunteers, community advocates, and the respondents' family members. Anyone interested in observing hearings or studying the proceedings is welcome to attend. No special permissions required, even for reporters. Other immigrant respondents face individual hearings. These are often respondents' final hearings, where the immigration judge makes a decision on whether to grant or deny asylum applications. Observing these hearings may be limited by a judge or attorney. Even though every case isn't publicly accessible, some observers find a way to show their support for immigrant respondents in other ways. One group of peaceful religious observers gather outside the courthouse every other Thursday to share prayers for immigrants facing hearings. The Immigration Court is bustling under the Trump administration's immigration reforms, which means millions of immigrants applying for citizenship or asylum. This is Ruby Seekin with Capitol News Service.
Okay, excellent, excellent. So again, as we think about nonviolent resistance, we want to make sure, one, that we do have a plan. Again, this manual will be available to any who are interested in it by next month. And we also want to make you aware that the Presbyterian Church, we have restructured our advocacy offices, so we no longer have just two offices, the UN office and the Washington office. We also now include immigration and advocacy, MRTI, which is mission responsibility through investment, and also race, gender, and LGBTQ community. So we are a resource for you, as obviously Presbyterian Advocacy Hour is. So Catherine, very quickly, I know we don't have a lot of time left, but are there any questions that anyone posed during the course of our conversation?
Yeah, feel free to post questions in the Q&A or in the chat. There are a lot of people are asking for the resources and are grateful for the upcoming resource. Please send the slides.
Okay. And also from our panelists, did they have any questions or input that they wanted to give? Well, I'll keep talking then.
Great.
And so as we continue to go forward, we do want to do it together. One of the things I do want to leave with you is that there are a lot of resources in every community. One of the things that I'm very empowered by as we continue to do our work, as we go around the country talking with Presbyterians in particular, there's a lot of activity going on. And I think that the desire for advocacy is growing within the denomination, that more and more Presbyterians are asking, what can I do? So continue to reach out to the offices about ways that we can resource you. In the digital world, we are very accessible. We can do workshops, and our staff has a wide array of talents, but also with the other offices that are represented. Self-development of people can talk about its history of providing direct support to organizations that empower people to be a part of the leadership. Hunger has a long history of providing resources. And so we have a coalition of resources within the church. And the last PSA I do is that for our Presbyterian News Service, they put out some excellent articles. And so if you're not a subscriber, I really would encourage you to become a subscriber to our news service to see the work of the church that is going on.
Yeah, I think that there was another question about how do you handle different political orientations in the church if you want to take action, and that's been a trend of questions in the chat, and I'm wondering if you can address that. I think a lot of people might not feel supported in their own congregation to take action.
It's difficult. It is very difficult. And I'll be honest with you, justice advocacy can be a lonely path to walk down. People prefer in the life of the church, they prefer charity. It's easier to do, and it has an immediate impact, immediate feedback. You know, people are grateful for what you do for them, but you have to plant seeds for justice advocacy. And one of the things that I tell people of faith is to do it through the language of the church, the language of faith, to talk about that we are being witnesses to Christ in the public arena, that we are doing what Scripture informs us. You cannot read the Bible and not talk about justice from the beginning to the end. So you have to kind of reorient and re-educate members of the church with the understanding that we do have politically different ideologies in the church. Some folk are politically green, red, some are politically blue. We have what's called purples. So people have to feel respected. But I continue to urge people of faith to continue nudging. Don't stop, because it's hard to measure when you're having success. And I think, Dr. you said this, over the course of time, we do see change. There was a day when slavery was legal in this country, a day when Jim Crow was the law of the land in this country. And it took centuries of struggle and of protest to wrong these rights. We know that there was a time that it was illegal in this country to be a member of the LGBTQ community. So we have seen change, but it comes over the course of time. And sadly, some of the things that we are involved in this struggle over, we won't see resolved within the course of our lifetime. But we are making it happen. We are planting seeds, and especially for our children. They need to see that people of faith have a prophetic voice in the community, that we are not silent, that we care about the institution of the church, but we also care about what's going on outside of the doors of the church. So I would say consistency, faith, and most of all, love.
Great. Thank you, Jimmy. It's great to close on. And also, if people aren't feeling like they can do the work in their own local congregation, there are a lot of faith-based organizations in your communities that you can join with that are taking action. Just look up those faith-based organizations and join those as well. And I just want to make a couple announcements before we go. March 11th is the Community Connection Hour, and this is a smaller gathering where you can come and network and be in small groups with people and discuss advocacy ideas, and the link to register is in the chat. And then next month, March 25th, our topic will be Christian nationalism. And we really appreciate you taking your time to be with us and your enthusiasm. And we hope that this has been a good gathering for you all. And we look forward to next month. And thank you to all of the amazing panelists, to William, Brett, Anna, Alonzo, and Jimmy for all your work, and for everyone behind the scenes that made this possible. Thank you to all. Stay safe out there.